Here, it's a bright sun, but maybe it's a good sign. My deep thanks for Paul for being here, for being in town, for being willing to speak. I want to make sure to give Paul and Capo the honor that he deserves, also for the work that he is doing that you'll hear about tonight. So Paul Hamburger, originally from Manchester, England, is the CEO and owner of the British sportswear brand Admiral. Before beginning the helm at Admiral, Paul held significant leadership roles in global telecommunications companies T-Mobile, Cable and Wireless, and most recently managed the multi-billion-dollar movie division of Telecom New Zealand. After a decade in Miami, Paul and his wife and their 4 children made Aliyah to Israel 9 years ago. His children have since completed their national service. They're now pursuing their studies and careers in Israel. Though not a professional fundraiser or public speaker, Paul is a dedicated businessman and proud Zionist who is deeply committed to stepping up in this time of crisis. During the early weeks of the recent conflict, Paul, alongside friends from Renana, raised $8 million to supply critical equipment to soldiers in the IDF. The experience of delivering these supplies to Kibbutz Alumim amid the devastation profoundly impacted Paul, and motivated by the urgent need to support this community, he has since focused his efforts on aiding Alumim's recovery and addressing the broader challenges posed by Israel's agricultural and economic crisis. Collaborating with friends in the U.S., Paul has now raised over $1.2 million to help the residents of Alumim rebuild their lives. However, there is so much more, and that is why he is here with us this evening. So my deep thanks to him, my thanks to Rabbi Eli, to those in Farad, as well as to Rabbi Ari, Rabbi Geiger, at Israel, for publicizing this evening. I know you were there for Shabbat, and we heard wonderful things, and so my deep thanks that we were able to be in touch and make this evening happen. So thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure I can actually improve on that, so I think we can all go home now.
You're going to talk to the mic, but you're going to make, I'm telling you.
I'm going to struggle if I don't talk into this mic. Thank you for the introduction. As I said, it's hard to improve on that. I actually just spoke earlier today, and you were there, at the German-American Association. And I was apparently the warm-up act, which I didn't know for Don Bacon. So Paul Hamburger and Don Bacon make the perfect partnership, apparently. He's quite an interesting character. Anyway, so you've already explained the background. There's my family. My wife is over here. My children are all in Israel with us and have served, done their national service. We were all in Jerusalem on the morning of the attacks, October the 7th, and we heard the rockets coming down and the sirens going off, and we ended up in the bomb shelters. We had no idea what was going on, and then of course that evening we found out. As Rabbi Sid said, we got together a group of friends that evening and put together a pretty amazing team. It's amazing how Jews pull together in times of crisis, and raised money for soldiers who did not have the equipment that they needed, the helmets, the vests, and the knee pads, which I know is surprising probably to many people, but they just didn't have the equipment, the critical equipment that they needed. And found a way to fund that equipment by raising funds from the amazingly generous American community. And it is I am very proud to say, although I'm very British, my accent is British, I lived in America for 10 years, I'm now also an American citizen. I think the community here is quite incredible. So for those of you, how many of you have been to Israel? Let's start there. Oh, all of you have been to Israel. Have any of you been down south? To the south of Israel. Okay, so a few of you have been also down to the south. Let's see if this cursor is working. So this is the border with Gaza, and these are all of the communities, kibbutzim, that were affected by the attacks on October 7th. There are 16 kibbutzim on the border, and the importance of those kibbutzim and those communities can't be underestimated. The cost of this war has been huge. So far, over $50 billion has been spent. So to put it into perspective, the US provides loans of $3.8 million annually, and it's cost us $50 billion. The level of investment has gone down. Growth has gone down from about 6.5% to 1%. It's amazing that we still have growth, but we're down. Jobs obviously are down. Some people say about a third of the high-tech jobs have been retrenched. Imports are down, exports are down, and more recently Fitch have downgraded the credit rating. Part of the challenge we have is that there now a labour shortage in Israel because, of course, a lot of the Arab labour that was used in the construction industry, which is one of the engines of our economy, is now no longer able to work in construction. So we're having to bring in labour from China and other areas to try and keep our construction requirements and needs going. So labour has been a challenge, and of course that's increased all the prices as well. I'm going to show you in a second the impact on agriculture as well, because 70% of Israel's fruit and veg comes from these kibbutzim and these communities in the south. Sorry for squinting at you, by the way, the sun's right in my eyes. So 70% of the fruit and veg come from the south, 50% of Israel's eggs, and if you take the whole of the south of Israel, not just these 16 communities, 36% of Israel's milk. That's a massive issue. There are 655,000 people in Israel who have food security issues. They are living not knowing where their next meal is going to come from. I know that's quite shocking probably to you, but that's the challenges that we have. And so because these kibbutzim, many of them were destroyed, we had to import our eggs and our milk, and from some countries that now won't let us buy the eggs and milk. So Turkey was an area that we imported from. They cut off economic ties, not diplomatic, but economic ties. We import our eggs from Poland, and so that has also driven prices up. It can't be underestimated the challenge that we have in making sure that these communities get back up and running. It's critical to feeding Israel and also to the economy of Israel. So Kibbutz Alumim, which you see there in the red, the fields of Alumim border the Gaza border. And not only, and I'll explain to you some of the challenges and what happened to them in October, but they've effectively in the last 10 months lost $50 million of revenue. Their dairy business stopped, and that was a very significant part of what they did. All of their chickens and their egg and poultry business stopped, and all the other businesses closed. They also suffered $15 million of damages. And so people have said to me, well, the government's not helping with this, and the charity's not helping. I'm going to try and explain that today. So they've had to deal with death, destruction, trauma, and for the last 10 months they've lived in families of 4, have been kind of crammed into hotel rooms in Netanya for about 10 months. It sounds quite nice being in a hotel room, but when your kids come home from school and they're in one room and the wardrobes are pretty small, they haven't got a place for clothing, and to sit and do homework, and after 10 months that's pretty rare. And they have to have breakfast at the time the hotel serve it, dinner at the time the hotel serve it, and whatever they serve, that's what they have to have. They've had that for 10 months. So and also the worry about what are they actually going back to? What community can they rebuild? How do they do it? 80% of Alumim is now returned. That's partly because the government have enforced it. The way they've enforced it is by cutting the funding to the hotels. And so regardless of the level of trauma, these people have had to get back. And it isn't a choice like you and I would all have, because this is a socialised kibbutz. They don't have their own bank accounts, they don't have their own cars, they don't have their own homes. So they can't simply pick up and say, well, we're going to go work in Tel Aviv, or we're going to go live in Netanya or Herzliya or any of the other places. So that's part of it. I would say also there was an unbelievable spirit of determination to return to their home and rebuild it, and a confidence that they will rebuild it, despite the trauma. So what we'll do now is just talk through what happened, some of the impact of that, and some of the progress that we've now made with these people. So this is Alumim, the picture behind you, and in the distance, the back there, that is Gaza. And the kibbutz is split really into two. So you'll see at the front area here, And at the back area, all the commercial area of the kibbutz. As I said, the fields all border to Gaza, so there are 500 people who live on the kibbutz. 175 are under the age of 18. Before October 7th, there were 730 cows, 340,000 chickens. Their annual revenue was around $68 million a year, of which 85% comes from agriculture. These are just some of the faces from the kibbutz, and there are some stories that we'll cover off tonight, but I think it's worth just sharing some here with you. Sarit here on the right, she's just last week become a mother for the second time. She hid in her bomb shelter for 10 hours with a 2-year-old child, trying to keep 2-year-olds silent for 10 hours whilst there are terrorists outside your door is quite an achievement. This is Ohad, he's 23. Ohad had served in the army, was trained in the IDF, took the initiative when he heard the initial shots ringing outside his house, together with the fast response team, which is called the Kitat Konanut on the kibbutz. And each kibbutz has its own fast response team. And they defended against 3 waves of about 70 terrorists. 23-year-old went out and had to defend his own home with his back to his house and defend against terrorists. Obviously, all of the terrorists died in the he was involved in that. These are all people Eitan around the Kitat Kamanut, so that's what he did. This gentleman here ran the dairy, and unfortunately he died of a heart attack a few weeks after October 7th from all the stress of what he'd seen and managed. And this is his wife Esther, who ran the security team. So inside every kibbutz, and certainly inside Alumim, there's a secure room where they have TV screens with all the cameras around the kibbutz. So Esther was busy on that morning directing the Kitat Kamanot, the fast responders, as to where to go. Michael is a friend that I've made, actually also originally from Manchester, England. He ran the chicken houses, and you'll hear what happened to him in a second. And more here on the left, she's a pastry chef. She had a business before October 7th, which was a fantastic business, delivering pastries all over the south. And if you ever go down there, she's a really good baker. Unfortunately, her kitchens were all burned, and her business is gone. And so when we talk about trauma, it's also the uncertainty of what do I do now with my life? This is what I do. This is what I've been doing for quite a period of time, and now that livelihood for her is no longer there. So on the left here, you'll see Stevie Marcus, who unfortunately passed away. Within 7 days of the war happening, I was down on Alumim delivering vests and helmets to soldiers, and I met all of the people on Alumim, and they were so amazing. I realized there were things we could do to help. On the right, you'll see the terrorists at the front gates of Alumim. Ruthlessly, these terrorists killed about 70 people at the front gates, and we'll share that information with you in a second. So these are the maps that were found on the terrorists. A few hundred Gazans worked on the kibbutz, on Kibbutz Alumim. And it's important for you to understand this was the case for about 15,000 work permits were given to Gazans to come and work in Israel. This was the policy, I suppose, of the government, you could say, to try and make the lives of Gazans easier and to give an income and try and integrate. These kibbutzim, many of them were peaceful. The children of the Gazans, they would be ferried from the border to Israeli hospitals for treatment by members of the kibbutz. So these were not people that, I guess, they had a quarrel with this land. This particular land nobody would argue that this is Israel. This is not disputed territory in this part in any way. But these people had worked on the kibbutz for about 10 years, so they knew exactly where everyone was. They knew where the head of the security team lived. They knew where everyone in the kibbutz who had guns, where they lived. And I don't know whether you can see it here, but it's pretty hard because of the sunlight, but there are actually green arrows and red arrows, and there are markings on these maps for exactly which houses to go to, where to go to do the most damage and to stop the leadership of the kibbutz by eliminating them first. Now, luckily for Alumim, I'm not sure you can call it luck, certain things happened that changed the course of history for Alumim. But if you go to other kibbutzim, like Kibbutz Be'eri or Kisiflim or Kfar Aza, they're completely destroyed. And where that all started was with these maps. They knew exactly which houses to go to, and they wiped out the Kitab and not the first responders first. That's where they went to first, so that there was no response. And then they went after the women and children. So Stevie took me on the back of his moped for about 7 days, showed me the road that divides Alumim from the residential side of Alumim, which is on the left here, and on the right, the commercial side. And in fact, what happened is, although the terrorists had those maps and they had instructions as to what to do, they heard on their radio that Nova Music Festival goers were escaping from the Nova Music Festival and driving up the road from the south to try and escape north towards Ashkelon. And so instead of going left on this picture where you see the houses, they went to the right to the front gate. And they gunned down all the cars that were coming up from the Nova Music Festival. And in fact, if you've been, and as many of you have been to Israel, there's something called a car cemetery now. I don't know if anyone's seen it, where they have the burned out cars and the cars that are riddled with bullet holes, and many of the cars outside Alumim that were stopped outside Alumim, and many of the people, unfortunately, passed away there. So this is 7:04 in the morning. The first wave of terrorists had broken in through the back gate, and this is the dairy of Alumim. You can actually see the milk container here. You can see the cow shed behind, and this is where the offices are. The terrorists are in the red circles here, and they'd surrounded the dairy. I have a video, but I felt it wasn't really appropriate to play some of the videos to all of you, but I'm sure you can imagine. The terrorists came in and they killed various people there, and you'll see now already the smoke is rising behind the dairy. They've already shot holes into the milk containers, so the milk is leaking out. And this terrorist here, you can see on the video, his arms in the air, he's got a grenade in his hand. He's about to blow up this building here with the Thai workers in it. So in total, 30 of the cows were killed in the dairy. All of the hay sheds were burned. All of the chicken coops were burned, and this building on the right here is where 22 Thai and Nepalese workers were burned to death. They were locked inside the rooms, they were shot at obviously, and then set alight. And this is where this is their bunks. Now some escaped, so some of the Thai workers, one particular worker climbed on top of this fridge and hid inside the roof space, lifted the tile there and hid inside the roof space. Another Thai worker covered himself in manure other than his nose, covered himself completely in manure and lay between the cows, hoping he wouldn't get trampled. And he managed to do that for I think about 8 hours. So these people obviously have pretty horrendous stories of what they saw and what went on, and it's quite something. What's even more amazing is some of those Thai workers that survived have come back to Alumim. They love it so much. So that's an amazing story, and meeting them was amazing. All of the greenhouses, so to put it into perspective, 27 football fields. Now I'm English, so I don't really know how an American football field measures, but I'm sure you all know, and it's very big, apparently. 27 football fields, the size of that, were burned to the ground. They went for maximum destruction, so they would take the irrigation lines and rip them out so that they would flood what was left of the orchards. Alumim is also one of the largest carrot growers in Israel, avocados and citrus. They destroyed all the orchards, all the cherry tomatoes, all the greenhouses burned to the ground. And so what this map shows you is some of the damage that was done, but actually not all of it, because 8 of the chicken coops that sit just outside the back gates of the kibbutz, they were also destroyed. All 340,000 chickens were burned, which is quite extraordinary because obviously there's not a lot that chickens can do to you. So, clearly that was part of, I suppose, the mass destruction. And of course the worst part of this is that 22 Thai workers and Nepalese workers died, 4 kibbutz members, 5 IDF soldiers. So after about 8 to 10 hours. The IDF were there, and an elite unit of what's called the Shaldag, which is the elite Air Force unit, came to defend and help the Kitat, Kononut, the first responders. And unfortunately, 5 of their members of their unit. So this is how challenging it was. 5 elite soldiers were killed as well. A couple of hostages were taken, and Bipin, whose picture is here, is still a hostage in Gaza today. And then what you'll see is the dots here represent the people that were killed on the road, this road here, which is now aptly called Death Road, out of the area through to the north. So what's the situation today? This is a photo that was taken, the positive side of things, that was taken only on the 15th of August with about 85% of Alumim back in the Hederochel, in the dining room, and for their first meeting. So they're back. That doesn't mean the challenges are solved. So on the left here, Esther Marcus, as I said, whose husband passed away, she's the head of the Resilience Centre in the south, and she's a trauma counsellor. Before October 7th, there were 17 trauma counsellors. There's now 190. And the mayor of the area tells me it's not nearly enough. They have maybe a third of the funding that they need to do what they have to do. The level of trauma is the flashbacks and all the other stuff that they're having to deal with is quite extraordinary. So people have said to me, well, okay, why are you raising money on the government sorting this? Aren't there other charities doing this? So, from a government perspective, the government have allocated a fund which is called the Takuma Fund, and they've allocated $2.6 billion, US dollars, over 5 years for everything. That's including, building hospitals, roads, absolutely everything. And it's just not nearly enough. Alumim of that is allocated 5.6 million. Again, over 5 years, so it's less than 0.19%. But they have to claim it, they have to apply for it, and it's a bit like making an insurance claim. You're not guaranteed you're going to get it, and you're certainly not going to get the renewable value, you'll get a percentage. At the moment, they're getting about 40% of whatever the value that they claimed. 40%. And some of that money has already been spent. So, for example, the 5.6 million, 890,000 funded their accommodation in Netanya for the last 10 months. 460,000 funded demolishing some of the buildings that were burned and unsafe, and they couldn't come back to the kibbutz until those buildings were demolished. And then 4.32 million is over the next 5 years for new buildings, because the government actually, I don't want to use the word desperate, but they think it's very important people go back down to the border and repopulate the border. Let's be clear, if the Kitat Kononut on Alumim hadn't stopped these 70 terrorists, more would have come onto that kibbutz. There were more that tried to come onto that kibbutz. And if they hadn't been in the way, they would have made it all the way up to Ashkelon, they would have made it to Beersheba. The numbers that you see on the news of 1,200 being murdered, you would have seen very different numbers of that had that happened. So we all need these communities to survive and to thrive. The final piece that the government have done is they've allocated, it's a bit like, I guess, the Inland Revenue Service here. They've said, well, Alumim have paid taxes over a period of time. What we're going to do is we're going to give them essentially a rebate. And that's 2.84 million, which hasn't yet been paid. And the kibbutz, as I said, there's about 15 million of damages. They've claimed 13.5 million so far. And they've been told that they'll get 2.84, which hasn't yet been paid over 10 months later. So it's very challenging, very challenging. On the charity side, this is where the American community has stepped up. 1.4 billion has been raised. From the Federation, 850 million, of which about 500 million has been allocated. But for Alumim, 445,000 has been allocated. Also JNF, who I'm here representing, and we'll talk about the work that they do. Not only have they offered matching funding on anything that you donate this evening, but they've also, on top of that, helped with buying critical equipment, so about $556,000 of tractors and other critical equipment to get the kibbutz back to work. So when I saw that these people's houses were not destroyed, and I realised that actually 15 million and they've only got about 5 million allocated, and the government are not going to get them to where they need to be, these people will not be able to get back, the community won't be able to get back, and you'll have 500 people who are traumatised with no future, no job, because they can't do anything. All of the tractors are burned, they can't sow the potatoes or the carrots or deal with the orchards, they've got no equipment, they've lost it all, and you certainly can't do it by hand. So I went about trying to raise money. So far we've raised $1.2 million. And you know, whilst it seems like a lot, it isn't nearly enough. Now, it is amazing that people have been giving. The challenge that I see is a challenge, and I don't want to be too controversial here, but the challenge of prioritisation. So when I look at where that 1.4 billion has gone, it's gone largely to amazingly worthy causes. But I would argue, from my standpoint of course, that those causes haven't really been prioritised properly. So for example, Magen David Adom raised nearly $300 million, amazingly worthy organisation. 200 ambulances were bought at $350,000 each. Right now, I would argue we didn't need those ambulances in the last 10 months. What we needed was to replace the tractors that would sow the potatoes that would feed people. Because those ambulances couldn't go to Gaza anyway. It isn't that we don't need them, it isn't that that isn't a worthy cause, it's an incredibly worthy cause. People gave because they felt, oh, we trust Magen David Adom, let's give. We trust the Federation, let's give. I think the challenge now is all of you have been asked to give and keep getting asked to give. And the challenge is to show you how that is being used and how it's being used properly, which I don't do here now. So the first thing we did was we broke our project down into 5 projects. Firstly, making these people feel safe to go home, because I met with all of the families and said to them, tell me, what is it that it would take for you to go back and restart your lives? And the first thing was to say, well, they don't feel safe on the kibbutz anymore. This wasn't about the rockets. We can't solve the challenge of the IDF stopping the rockets coming in. But they actually didn't feel safe, that even if the rockets stopped, that people wouldn't infiltrate the kibbutz. So we fixed the cameras, we provided them drones for the fields so they could get early detection of perhaps any further infiltrations. We secured their homes. If you look at the picture on the right, there are bullet holes through the doors at the fronts of their homes, and glass smashed and bullet holes in their windows. So we have replaced the windows with secure glass that you can't, shatterproof, that you can't just throw rocks through. Because what happened on this is they threw rocks through the windows and then threw fire bombs through the windows to burn the houses. So with the new glass, obviously to stop that, we provided secure front doors. The other thing that happened, and many of you have been to Israel, how many of you have ever been in a secure room or a bomb shelter in Israel? Anyone here? You have. So you'll know the mamad doors, right? Those metal mamad doors. They're not lockable, and they're also not bulletproof. So this gentleman here, when the terrorists were in his house, held on to the handle of his bomb shelter door, and unfortunately they shot through the door. So you'll see bandages where his hands once were. He now doesn't have hands. Again, an amazing guy that you should be incredibly positive. But what we have now done is we have raised the funds to make the bomb shelter doors bulletproof and lockable. Now, the impact of that is that if you're a mother and you've got 4 children and they're going to bed at night and they hear a bang or a noise at the front door and they're scared, at least they know their front door is secure, their windows are secure, and actually if they go into their bomb shelter, they can lock the door and it's bulletproof. We also did a couple of other things. We added things like air filtration systems, because when the terrorists came, if as they did here, they managed to hold on to the door for long enough and not let them in, what they would do is they would try and smoke them out. And so as the houses were burning, the smoke would go into the bomb shelters, and then they would jump out of the windows and then they'd get shot. So what we've done is put air filtration units in all of the bomb shelters that filter out the smoke and stop that from ever happening again. We've also supplied first aid equipment so that if they are injured inside bomb shelters, they can treat themselves, and even fire extinguishers. So these are the things we've already done. There are some things that we're now doing to take us to the next stage, which is what I'll talk about. We have cleaned up the buildings that needed to be demolished. We've repaired the dairies. So the dairy's up and running. There are 700 cows left. They are now milking the cows again. We have, as I said, replaced the cameras and the drones. We fixed the front doors and the windows. We've provided, as I said, the filtration systems and the first aid kits and the fire extinguishers. And now, what we're looking to do is move to the next phase. The first project is to build a secure youth centre, because a lot of the people, actually half of the residents of the kibbutz, don't work on the kibbutz, they work off the kibbutz. So again, if you're a mother off the kibbutz, you're coming home from work at 7 o'clock at night, your children finish school at 2 p.m. Previously, they would allow their children to wander around the kibbutz, go to the playgrounds. Now, obviously, there's a lot of trauma and they're very nervous about doing that. So we are going to build a secure youth centre. I'll show you that in a second. And the second part of what we're doing is trying to get people to rethink about what they sponsor. So instead of sponsoring an ambucycle or an ambulance, sponsor a tractor for $55,000 instead. Sponsor a combine harvester. And I'll take you through that in a second. This is our youth centre. So this youth centre here, on the left here, this is the existing building, which is this building here. And this building next to it, you have to run out from this door here into this bomb shelter here. You clearly can't house 175 people. And of course, there's no door on that bomb shelter either. And the reason is because they have 10 seconds to run from the rockets into the bomb shelter. But now what we've realised is that actually you do need a door on a bomb shelter, because otherwise the terrorists, if they can, they would just throw grenades into the bomb shelter. So we're having to rethink everything actually about them, because we were prepared for rockets, we weren't prepared for terrorists. So what we've done is now designed a secure youth centre, which is this building here, 1, 2, 3, 4. A new bomb shelter which connects to the secure youth centre, and we've connected it to the old school building as well. That's $1.2 million that we're raising for that. And obviously, with support of JNF and matching funding, they've been amazing with that. There are naming opportunities and what have you for that. The second project that we're taking on is replacing the chicken coops. So we've got a commitment from another donor to match. If we raise up to $1 million, they will give us up to $1 million, and that will give us the ability to grow 660,000 chickens that will allow them to pay $236,000 a year, and so it's a 4-year payback. Now, it might not seem terribly sexy, but if you can sponsor a chicken coop, what you're doing is you're providing food, and you're also providing the livelihood as well. We're also asking people to sponsor the replacement of the tractors that were all burned and the combine harvesters that were burned. So we're raising $877,000. Now, this is specifically for the potato business, just to put it into perspective. If we can get them 2 tractors and a combine harvester and a forklift truck, this is an agricultural community. If we can do that for $877,000, they can grow, they believe, 53 million potatoes. And they can generate a profit of 1.39 million. Ironically, before October 7th, Israel was exporting potatoes to the European Union. Now they're not, obviously, but they want to again. And there's an opportunity, and it costs us $877,000. If you think of the 1.4 billion that the Federation have raised, if we could get that $877,000, we could give these people a livelihood again and put food on the table. And then the final piece is to rebuild the greenhouses. Again, there's an amazing organisation called Regrow, which is in Israel, and they're dedicated to restoring the damaged agriculture in Israel. You can look them up online, they're fantastic. They're an amazing CEO and an amazing team. They've raised $13.5 million, and that's, again, it's not really enough, but there's a fund available, and so they will match funding for us to replace the greenhouses. And what the kibbutz want to do is they want to grow cherry tomatoes and herbs and peppers, and again, that would be part of their program. So these are very specific tasks. The 2 things that we're looking to do is raise money for the youth centre and provide food security. There are links here which I can provide to the rabbi as to where to donate. And obviously to send checks through the JNF. We're incredibly appreciative of their support. There's a leaflet here which shows what the JNF do, not just for Alumim, but for other organisations. And also there's a donation card for the JNF here that if you just write Alumim on the top here, they'll make sure that those funds get directly to Alumim. Just so we're absolutely clear, I don't generate anything from this. This is just for the love of Israel. There's no commissions, and our travel is not paid for out of this. Every single penny goes to Alumim, and also the JNF do not charge anything to clear the funds, and it's all tax deductible as well. So thank you very much for listening. I'm happy to take any questions. I appreciate your time.
You were openly focused on Alumim?
Alumim, Kibbutz Alumim, yeah.
No, right. What about the others?
Am I allowed to stand away from the microphone now?
At this point, long as no one complains, you're
Okay,
fine.
it's a great question. It's a great question.
1 second.
Yeah.
Can you hear him?
Do you want me? I'll stand back. I'll stand back.
I'll follow the rules. Okay, I'll stand the microphone. It's a great question, and I get asked it often. Aside from having 4 children and a wife and a business to run, and other commitments, it was a challenge for me to take on more than Alumim, if I'm honest. The primary reason that I chose Alumim is not that the others aren't worthy, is that Alumim was one of the first to go back. And that's because their houses were not destroyed. So they could go home. The part that was destroyed was all the commercial side, the dairy, the hay sheds. So what I realised is if we could get the commercial side up and running, they could go back and live there straight away. And I also felt that if we could do this right, this could be the playbook for the other kibbutzim to learn from what we've done. So that's the primary reason, really, that I took them on, is because I felt they could go back. At the same time that I visited Alumim, I visited Kisufim, Be'eri, Kfar Aza. I can tell you, there are truly the head of the Kitat Konanut, the security team on Kisufim. I've got a picture of him and me. 7 days after the war, all his neighbours were killed. Part of his family was killed. The whole place is destroyed, and he's smiling. This guy's, he's a hero in himself because of what he did to defend it. He is as worthy as anyone on Alumim, I can tell you that. However, it's so badly destroyed, they're not going to be back for 5 years. Be'eri will not be back. Be'eri's situation is different. You'll have heard of Kibbutz Be'eri on the news probably quite a lot. They've received donations of like 20 million euros from the German government. They are actually one of the wealthiest kibbutzim in the south of Israel. Actually, in Israel full stop. They put money and the checks and the credit cards for all the banks. So they're an incredibly successful kibbutz. There are other kibbutzim. If any of you have got a swimming pool here, it's likely that your robotic pool cleaner is from one of the other kibbutzim. They're one of the largest manufacturers of robotic pool cleaners in the world. There are incredible, drip irrigation, the netafim, the drip irrigation comes from another kibbutz. So some of these kibbutzim they don't rely on their agriculture at all. They're actually incredible businesses. Alumim, unfortunately, relies on its agriculture. Fortunately for Israel, because we need someone to produce the milk and produce the eggs and produce the poultry and do our vegetables and fruit. We need it. We can't clearly rely on the Turkish to deliver that to us. So we need it. So Alumim is really critical from a food security perspective as well, which is the other reason I took it on. They could go back first. The food was critical, and 85% of their income comes from that. Frankly, they have no other choice, and they need the help. I don't know whether that gives you the answer. If we can successfully rehabilitate Alumim, I'd love to help other kibbutzim.
Thank you.
Can you explain when we had talked about kibbutz Saad as an example of a kibbutz that wasn't as hard, but the way the money is distributed in the regional council is based on numbers, not based on damage.
Yeah. So I'm definitely not here to criticise governments or bodies or institutions. We'll all make our own judgments on those things and what happened and what was done. All I can say, I didn't know any of this when I started. Look, I have a sports brand. I sell clothing for a living, basically. That's what I do. So I've learned a lot in the last 6 months about people and how they operate. So there are two kibbutz in there next to each other. They're very good friends, by the way. They're very close. So kibbutz Sa'ad is right next to. I'll just show you quickly. So you've got it on the map again quickly to get a picture of it. There you go. So there you go. So kibbutz Sa'ad is right next to kibbutz Alumim, and kibbutz Be'eri is also right next to Alumim. They're all of, by the way, different political persuasions. Be'eri is a very, what you would call left wing, I guess, in Israel kibbutz, and Alumim is not, but they are friends. And people on Alumim work on Be'eri, and people on Be'eri work on Alumim, and it's amazing. You know, there aren't the divisions that you maybe see on the news. Some of those divisions don't actually exist. It's an amazing thing. So Sa'ad and Alumim actually share a school. All the kids from Alumim go to the school on kibbutz Sa'ad. Sa'ad, for whatever reason, it was a miracle. There were terrorists trying to get into the kibbutz, and it was exactly the time by 20 terrorists trying to get into Sa'ad at the back gate. A tank came out of nowhere, an Israeli tank, one tank out of nowhere, killed all the terrorists, and then drove off. And so Sa'ad didn't have a single terrorist on his kibbutz. They had no damage whatsoever, which was, I don't know whether you call it a miracle or not. Whilst Alumim was getting hammered, Sa'ad had nothing. The challenge is that Alumim has about 500 members, and Sa'ad has more than 1,000. It's between 1,000 and 1,500 members. And so when some of the funds are allocated from some of the charities, they allocate them at either a regional level or a governmental level. And if you're the mayor of the region and you've got 13,000 people in your region and you have to make an allocation of funds, you're going to do it and you're going to be influenced by the politics. It's a sad thing to say, but it's just the way it is, unfortunately, because that's where the votes are. And so Sa'ad will get more money, even though it didn't have any damage, than Alumim. Now, it doesn't mean that Sa'ad also aren't doing amazing things, and they are, they're amazing people. And they're also on the frontier with Gaza, and they also need, frankly, the work that I'm doing to try and secure the homes. Probably Sa'ad need that as well. So it's not that they're not worthy, it's just the way the funds are being allocated is not entirely commensurate with the damage that was done. Actually, kibbutz Alumim have only just been recognised as what's called a red kibbutz, which means they're in the top 20 most damaged communities by everything that's gone on. But it's taken 10 months and quite a fight to get them to that. So, does that answer your question about the allocation? There's unfortunately a lot of politics. I'm not a big fan of giving to great big organisations because I think a lot of stuff gets lost there. I think when you, which is why again, it kind of ties with your question, why am I doing this with Alumim? Because I know that you can, someone here can donate for that tractor and they can see it and they can name it and we can actually show them what was done with that and what the results were and exactly where their money's going. All the people that have donated the 1.2 million so far, we've literally taken pictures of the houses and the families that now have been, and the kids that now have a secure room to go to because of the donations of those families. It's very, very, very accountable. I'm a big fan of getting straight to the organisation rather than through groups or governmental ways. Yes.
Agriculture.
Yeah.
So, has any made use of American agriculture to go to these places at all? And also, agriculture in the United States, they share the combine instead of having them themselves. Is that possible?
So the question was, I don't know if you did or didn't hear it, the question was, correct me if I'm wrong here, that can there be a link between agriculture in the United States and agriculture in Israel, especially given this is an agricultural community, and also there is shared resource here where combines are shared versus used by any one particular kibbutz. Actually, kibbutzim already do share quite a lot. So, for example, there's a tractor repair garage on Alumim the repairs for all of the kibbutzim tractors in that area. There's also a packing house on Alumim. It's one of the businesses that Alumim runs, or ran before it was burned, where the fruit and the vegetables are packed on Alumim for about 10 of the kibbutzim, and then it's shipped out to Europe. So they already do share resources already, so the answer is yes to that part of the question. In terms of linking up with agricultural organisations in the US, it's interesting. I had a conversation with Bob this morning from the Federation, the Executive Director of the Federation, to see whether there are connections even here in this community where we could perhaps, for example, connect with John Deere, the tractor organisation, to see if we can get tractors over to Israel. It's not that easy bringing in product from the US into Israel because there's regulations, as you can imagine, and there are distributors in Israel as well who probably wouldn't be happy about it. It's not quite as easy as you think, but I'm going to give it a go. So if anyone knows anyone here with connections in agriculture, then in addition to obviously the donations, we'd be very grateful for any connections we can get in agriculture to try and create those connections. Talking about connections, by the way, one of the other projects that we've done, I didn't put on here, we have funded a series of videos, 5-minute videos, to be used in American high schools, where we're going to talk about what happened to Alumim on the 7th of October, what happened to them in Netanya, what's happened to them as they've now returned, and then set up Zoom classes between the kids on Alumim, there's 175 of them, and the kids in the US and schools in the US, play the video and then run a program for an hour, three or four different programs for hour classes as to what's happened to educate, and also connect the kids from Alumim with kids in the US. We're trialing that in Miami in the next couple of months.
Is there a website for these videos and such that you could give us, or?
So,
Back to the mic. The videos, literally, I've only just seen the first edits of that. But as soon as there are links to them, I'll send them to the rabbi, and we will definitely share them. They're meant to be used in kind of a classroom type setting, and they're more for 10 to 18-year-olds than they are for our age group. But that was designed as an educational tool. In terms of a website, I deliberately didn't set up a formal charity here. I didn't want any more bureaucracy. I didn't want anyone to think this was about individuals trying to get covered or what have you. The money goes straight to JNF, and then it goes straight to Alumim. And my responsibility then is to report back to donors as to how it's being used and what have you. So we don't have a website, is the answer. But I will share via email with you the links for the donations, and also as more things happen and videos take place, we'll share those as well. Thank you very much.
My deep thanks for a difficult topic, but an important topic. So, Paul, thank you for being here this evening. If you have individual questions, I'm sure Paul will be around for a couple of minutes. We can talk. Again, as I mentioned this on multiple Shabbatot, I think to what Paul said beautifully, this doesn't knock our giving from being able to give to the Western Galilee and Federation and all the other things that we do in the community. This doesn't take away from that, but there is a level of bureaucracy, and the fact that if you know an organization in Israel that you're able to simply make a decision to give to, that can be sometimes just as meaningful, if not more, than kind of giving to the overarching organization that also kind of distributes funds, which is also a very honorable and good thing to do. But the fact that we can have a connection also from Omaha and different connections, and know that that money is being spent with a certain level of responsibility, but also doing incredible good for the folks down south having been down there. It's incredibly important. And so thank you for joining us this evening, Paul. Thank you both, Wendy, for being in town. And so we hope we can help out. So again, thank you all for being here this evening.
Anyone that would like to visit Alumim, if you're on